Appendix. Preface to Le Taylorism, 1928, French edition. Having acquainted myself with some of the recent publications on Taylorism, I wanted to once again draw attention to the ideas of the great American engineer and react against the erroneous interpretation that has often been given to them. I was particularly encouraged to do so by the learned director of the Scientific Organization Institute of Warsaw, Mr. Adamiecki. He had asked me for permission to publish a Polish translation of my various articles. To give more utility to this work, he classified the various subjects treated and cut my publications into sections to bring together similar viewpoints scattered here and there. In this translation, there is not a word that is not mine, and yet there is no trace of the original composition. This work has been a real success, and will be translated into Italian and English. I express here all my gratitude to Mr. Adamiecki. From various sides, foreign friends have urged me to publish the French text. I decided not to do so for the following reason. This memoir presents itself as an original work, but not for a French reader, who will say at every line, "Already seen, this is old news." It was not the same abroad, where I had never published anything on Taylorism. Candidly, this French publication is a reprint of old memoirs, and I prefer to keep their individual appearance, despite the repetitions this entails. However, I have grouped these memoirs in an order that is as close to possible as the plan established by Mr. Adamiecki. Finally, I send my thanks to Madame Nabrowska, a Polish artist who graciously took charge of drawing the portrait reproduced at the beginning of this volume, based on one of my photographs, without ever having seen me. Taylorism. The doctrines of F.W. Taylor were known in France through the translations that I had made between 1908 and 1911 of his three fundamental papers: The Cutting of Metals, Shop Management, The Principles of Scientific Management. The French edition of the last of these works has arrived in the hands of all our engineers. It was hoped that this would create a movement of ideas capable of provoking systematic research on the entirety of industrial manufacturing processes. Some interesting studies have certainly been published. The best known are those by Mr. Charpy on the production of steel at the St. Jacques factories, and Mr. Nussbaumer on the manufacture of smokeless powder at the Hippo powder factory. Of the engineers of the Penuit on naval construction, and Messrs. Michelin on accessory details of their rubber industry, but in total, they have been few in number. The orientation of the research on the organization has progressively deviated. The precise study of judiciously chosen specialized industrial processes has been abandoned to throw oneself into the examination of overly complex assemblies. Scientific methods have been abandoned for empiricism. Thus, the results announced did not impose themselves with the same certainty as Taylor's own studies. The definition of the composition of rapid-cutting steels and their tempering temperature, his rules for metalworking, for shoveling, for transporting heavy loads, his organization of the work preparation office, his bonus system for production that has been introduced in a large number of factories. The systematic application of the same research methods would have infinitely multiplied similar progress. Unfortunately, this has not been the case. The essential characteristic of Taylor's work is the scientific application to industrial problems. The starting point of all science is grounded in determinism. Chance does not exist. A production process carried out under identical conditions always gives identical results. Accidental deviations necessarily come from some changes, wanted or not, during actual operations. This means that every industrial outcome is a determined function of certain factors and can be expressed by an algebraic formula. To establish these formulas, it is necessary to first recognize qualitatively the existence of the different factors, often quite numerous, and then to precisely measure their magnitude. These functions always present a maximum corresponding to the optimum yield. One manufacturing process, and only one, gives the best cost efficiency. To uncover the ideal manufacturing process, one must adhere to the Descartes principle of dividing each problem into its most basic components. This requires not merely observing workers' tasks as a collective whole, but carefully analyzing each individual movement they make. All these elementary phenomena can, and must, be measured. One should time the worker's tasks, determine the temperature of the furnaces, evaluate the effort of the machine tools. To finally arrive at establishing the very complex algebraic formula that must synthesize the observations made, and to do so without excessive expenditure, it is essential to adhere to an essential rule of the scientific method. Always group the experiments in pairs, combining them in such a way that they differ only by the change of a single variable. In his studies on golf grass cultivation, Taylor planted 1,000 small squares of grass, grouped 2 by 2, and only differing by a single condition: nature of the seed, composition of the soil, watering, fertilizers, etc. The least difficult task. For this, Taylor provides the workers with descriptive cards of the work to be done and makes available to them the possible advice of a foreman, capable of personally carrying out the described operations, in accordance with the instructions given on the card. But it's not enough to teach the workers the methods to employ. Their consent to the use of these methods must also be obtained. It is always painful to change one's habits, to give up idleness, to adhere to a fixed rule. To gain the necessary goodwill from the workers, Taylor demands first and foremost that the employers change their mentality towards their subordinates, not considering them as adversaries, but instead as collaborators. Understanding that personal benefit is a powerful motivator, he allocates a significant wage increase to the workers who comply with the indicated work rules and succeed in achieving the required production. According to his experiences, complete satisfaction is given to the workers by granting them a bonus ranging between 25% and 100% of the normal wages. With the increase being stronger, the more the work demands intellectual participation. The introduction of these new work methods has encountered, at least among us, 2 main difficulties. First, the preliminary studies required by Taylor and the additional wages granted to the workers are very expensive. These expenditures must pay off. They only do so if they are wisely applied. This depends on the abilities and activity of the industry leader. These methods can be compared to modern machines, which are more and more complicated, but also more and more economical if well driven. On the contrary, they become ruinous if poorly maintained. One would not trust a locomotive to an illiterate old stagecoach driver. Similarly, one cannot simply promote a scientifically ignorant foreman to manager. A person adapted to this new role is needed. To identify and recruit these organizing personnel constitutes the second difficulty, and is undoubtedly the most serious one, which has hitherto opposed the rapid spread of Taylorism. One might think that all engineers graduating from our major chemical schools are passionate about the scientific method. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Our entire education is oriented toward documentation. To pass exams, it is sufficient to know by heart the results of acquired science. The method does not matter. In factories, on the other hand, where it is necessary to discover new relationships between phenomena, that is, to create new chapters of science every day, the usefulness of this acquired knowledge is reduced to almost nothing. Having a basic understanding of the fundamental laws of mechanics, heat, and electricity is sufficient for beginning in factory work. What is indispensable, however, is the habit of personal diligence and intellectual effort, observation skills, a taste for precise measurements, and finally, the imagination and critical sense necessary to hunt for errors. These are qualities that our school programs ignore. To facilitate the spread of scientific and experimental Taylorism, it would be necessary to begin by reforming our secondary education, which is responsible for all our intellectual training, because it is given to us at the age when the mind possesses the greatest malleability. It should be given, as its sole program, the old maxim of Plutarch: "The minds of children are not a vessel that needs to be filled, but a fire that needs to be stoked." Rationalization. Since 1926, much has been said in France about the new organizational methods from Germany, known under the name of rationalization. This has introduced a certain confusion in people's minds, especially since this new term is used without worrying about defining it. If we stick to etymology, rationalization would only be the application of rational work methods. Scientific organization would obviously fit in this definition. But in fact, rationalization has so far only embraced a particular class of practical operations, those whose usefulness is evident, but whose practical realization faces social difficulties. Here are some examples of rationalization carried out by the Germans. Obliged by the Treaty of Versailles to pay a heavy war indemnity, they recognized the necessity for the whole country to work more, to increase its production. To this end, they imposed on the workers a 9th hour of work for the payment of the indemnity. To find the money necessary for the payment of installments for this indemnity, it was necessary to sell abroad. Not all factories are equally well placed for export. There was an interest in giving the factories near the border a monopoly on this exportation. They, therefore, created sales cartels that allowed them to always take products from factories closest to the point of consumption. Wanting to reduce their production costs, they grouped together factories producing the same goods in order to reduce their overhead. Why repeat the same laboratory research, the same furnace designs, the same machine tests in every factory? German employer unions grouped their common services for research, litigation, advertising, etc., into the same building. In these examples, and in all similar cases, we are dealing with problems of general interest that have a clear utility. However, they are difficult to solve because the logical solution conflicts with the alleged individual interest or where matters of personal pride are concerned. Rationalization is above all a moral order. It is enough to have the will to do what one knows is useful. This is only possible in countries where there is a national spirit strong enough to silence the demands of all those who profit from abuses. Scientific organization, on the contrary, is primarily of an intellectual order. It tackles problems whose solutions are not evident. It rediscovers, through long and difficult experiments, the working methods suitable for specific defined cases, often very complicated. The scientific organization only approaches rationalization in the application of recognized best methods. It then sometimes encounters social difficulties similar to those encountered by rationalization, and to overcome them, it must also act on public opinion. For example, it was necessary to fight against the assertions of certain journalists who depicted Taylorism as an organization of overwork, when in reality, one of its dominant concerns is to save workers from unnecessary movements and efforts. A remarkable example of rationalization was given in the United States by Herbert Hoover, the great supplier of food to Europe during the war, now Secretary of Commerce, perhaps tomorrow the President of the American Republic. He attacked waste. All unproductive expenditures of materials, labor, and motive power are obviously detrimental to a country's prosperity, but it is difficult to root out the abuses that cause this waste. Appointed on November 20, 1920, as President of the Federation of Engineering Societies of the United States, he announced on the very day of his election his intention to conduct an investigation into waste in 6 of the most important industries. In 1921, a volume entitled Waste in Industry provided the reports from the 6 engineers charged by him to carry out the investigation. Without waiting for the completion of this study, he approached the problem of waste from another angle, striving to improve the conditions of the workforce in the coal mines. Due to the variations in domestic heating consumptions at different times of the year, the exploitation of mines is seasonal, and 1/3 of the workers must be idle during the summer months. This is wasted labor. Herbert Hoover indicated a certain number of measures capable of reducing, and even eliminating, this periodic crisis of the workforce. Pleading on behalf of the 30,000 miners of the federated companies under his presidency, he sent a formal notice to the Senate of Washington for the implementation of certain legislative measures he deemed necessary. He added, in a somewhat irreverent way, that if the senators did not have time to study the issue, he was ready to hand them the text of the bill drafts and supporting reports. All they would have to do was vote. Appointed Secretary of Commerce, he continued the same campaign, but with more parliamentary methods. He proposed reducing the number of different models of the same product available on the market in order to offer the greatest benefit to the factories, retail stores, and consumers. With this aim, he unofficially instigated agreements between producers and consumers, providing them with all the material facilities capable of aiding the completion of their task. One of the most remarkable results concerns the bricks used for house construction. There were about 40 models of different dimensions in the United States. 39 were abolished, and only one retained. This is, admittedly, an extreme example. Generally, the number of types retained remained between 1/5 and 1/10 of those that previously existed. Week by week, new brochures entitled The Simplified Practice appear, detailing the proposed suppressions in various industries, with the list of industrial firms, producers, and consumers who have committed to comply with the adopted rules. Much could be done in France in this direction, but our individualistic and anarchic spirit will make the attempt of rationalization very difficult. Too many industrialists see only their immediate interest and do not think about tomorrow. They ignore the famous pamphlet by Frederick Bastiat entitled What is Seen and What is Not Seen, where it is shown that the most apparent benefits are often the least real. I could give too many examples of this mentality gathered during meetings of standardization committees, specifications, customs duties, or the relations I had during the war with numerous industries, but I prefer to abstain. The introduction of rationalization would also render us great services in the realm of politics. We all know what bad governments, supported by leagues of special interests, mobilized for the defense of abuses, cost us. The reduction of the number of deputies from 600 to 300 would save taxpayers more than $100 million, and parliamentary work would be better done. But where to find the necessary leverage? The abolition of the majority of monopolies would realize savings that have often been calculated, but too many voters have vested interest stemming from this source of waste. The reduction in the number of civil servants would allow, by paying them better, to demand normal work from them. Everyone knows this, but their unions are all powerful, etc. Before seeking to rationalize our industry and politics, we must manage to create a public opinion capable of imposing its will. We would need to undertake constant agitation for this purpose, through writing in books and newspapers, through speech in conferences and public meetings. We should post the following notice on all the walls. Frenchmen, defend your wallet. Remember that every time you pay 100 francs to the state or a merchant, 30 francs disappear in waste, without any profit for you. Beware of pickpockets. Collaboration. One of the great difficulties faced in the organization of production, whether by Taylor's scientific methods or by rationalization, comes from the difficulty of obtaining the cooperation of the men who participate in the same work. The owners belonging to the same industry are jealous of each other and view one another only as competitors. They do not understand the profit they would gain from a friendly agreement to work together for the progress of their industry. They seem to think that greater benefits for themselves can only result from the ruin of another. The opposite sentiment is the principal reason for the superiority of German industry. The same mentality is found among the workers. They believe that they would become rich overnight if they managed to ruin their employers. For many of them, class struggle is an immutable dogma. They have not yet understood the example of Russia, where the worker, master of power and factory, is infinitely more unhappy than his comrades in any other European country. However, one can hope for an imminent improvement in this moral field. Numerous employer syndicates exist in France today. At first, they were primarily combat organs. Sales cartels were directed against the consumer. Then, associations were formed to resist attacks from worker unions or government interference. But by working side by side, the members of these meetings gradually recognized the benefits of collaboration and oriented themselves toward works of general interest for the community. The Information Bulletin of the Forge Committee is a work of documentation useful to all members of this committee, without being a combat organ. The Slag Cement Manufacturers Syndicate advertises its members' products at joint expense. The Chamber of Jewelry has organized collective exhibitions with the General Sales Office. This movement will certainly only expand and will tend to develop the spirit of collaboration. On the worker side in Europe, progress is not yet very marked, but a prime example has just been given in the United States by the American Federation of Labor, AFL, equivalent to our CGT, General Confederation of Labor. Under the impulse of its president, the late Gilbreths, and the current president Green, it has recognized the necessity of the working class to protect itself from general utility issues. It has acknowledged that the well-being of the worker grows with the prosperity of the industry on which he depends. A few years ago, Gilbreths had the Federation of Labor adopt a resolution recommending encouragement for scientific research as a means to increase industrial prosperity, and recently, Green has convened a workers' congress to study the issue of increasing factory output by eliminating waste. After violent, sometimes bloody, struggles against employers, American workers have adopted a contrary policy in recent years, recognizing the necessity of good understanding between capital and labor for mutual prosperity. Members of the Taylor Society, disciples of the great American engineer, have played a predominant role in this evolution of minds through their incessant propaganda. It was with great surprise that European workers, delegated by their comrades to go and study on site in the United States the causes of the prosperity of the industry in that country and the mechanism by which high wages are accompanied by very low production costs, have noted this mentality of the Labor Federation, entirely different from that of their unions. These observations were made by a mission sent to America at the expense of the English newspaper, the Daily Mail. This newspaper paid the travel expenses and a 2-month stay for 10 delegates designated by the English trade unions, imposing on them the only condition of taking a pledge of honor to make a loyal report on the observed facts upon their return. These delegates kept their promise. They manifest in all their reports the astonishment caused by the good understanding between workers and employers, the enhanced role of the unions, and finally, the efforts of all the workers to achieve the maximum production necessary for high wages. We are far from this in France, and even in Europe. Are our workers less intelligent than their American counterparts? If we were to believe it, they can therefore understand why the workers of the New World have understood. It would, however, be an error of judgment to believe that we could obtain the rapid adherence to these new ideas. It is a matter of experience that manual workers have few personal ideas. They do not have much time to think, and they mainly imitate what they see done around them. Their opinions are only the reflection, weakened and delayed, of those of the bourgeoisie, that is to say, the richest and most influential class of the country. It is first necessary for this class to understand the merits of collaboration and to openly practice it in order to succeed in instilling the same mentality among the workers. The most urgent effort must therefore be directed toward the diffusion among industrialists of this fundamental idea that any activity oriented toward the well-being of the community is ultimately more profitable than the advantages resulting from the misfortune of one's neighbor. The old maxim, unity makes strength, is as accurate for the economic field as it is in that of politics. Henry Le Chatelier. Mirerbel Les Seychelles, December 1927.